Campaign mode. President Donald Trump and Democratic nominee Joe Biden are courting voters in battleground states. Replacing the prime minister. Japan's ruling party names a successor to their outgoing leader. Back from Belarus. The Vatican's representative returns to Rome from Minsk, where the archbishop is still blocked at the border. And return to the Eucharist. A call to reopen churches and resume masses. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, September 14th, 2020. Good evening, and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. President Donald Trump prays for those suffering through the wildfires on the west coast of the United States, and Vice President Mike Pence talks about a certain group of nuns whom he says became a target of the previous administration. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, President Trump is out west getting updates on those wildfires as we speak. And at the same time, he's campaigning. Just last night, he held a big rally and he ripped Joe Biden, saying he just wants to go to sleep. And Biden, in turn, says the president's handling of the pandemic, awful.
As the west coast of the United States burns, prayers for those impacted.
Tonight, we're also praying for everyone throughout the West affected by the devastating wildfires.
California, Oregon, and Washington State all impacted.
And we thank the more than 28,000 firefighters and first responders courageously braving the danger.
At the same time, the campaign races forward. President Donald Trump took aim at his rival, Democratic nominee Joe Biden.
Kim Jong-un doesn't know about the problems that Joe has. We need very sharp people, I'm sorry. Joe is not qualified for this position.
Meanwhile, the former vice president voting in Delaware's state primary was asked if he's confident all votes will be counted in November.
I have confidence that Trump will try to not have that happen, but I'm confident the American public is going to insist on it.
And the Biden campaign released this attack ad.
The U.S. now has the most COVID-19 cases in the world.
The U.S. lost more than 20 million jobs just in the month of April, making it the worst jobs report on record.
Also on the campaign trail today, Vice President Mike Pence.
Truth is, Joe Biden has put forward the most extreme platform of any major party candidate in U.S. history.
He blasted Joe Biden for the legal war against the Little Sisters of the Poor.
I don't get it. You know, I was an altar boy. You know, I grew up in a wonderful Catholic family. I mean, you got a group of nuns that take a pledge of poverty to spend their entire lives helping the poor. But when Joe Biden was vice president, they became a target of the administration.
Later tonight, President Trump returns here to the White House, and tomorrow a very big day on tap here at the White House, the Abraham Accord, which will normalize diplomatic relations between the United Arab Emirates and Israel. Tracy?
Okay, thank you, Owen. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting for us tonight. Pressure on lawmakers is heating up to reach an agreement on a stopgap funding bill before September 30th in order to avert a government shutdown. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports. Eric?
The countdown is on. Congress has just 16 days before the September 30th deadline to pass a temporary or stopgap measure to prevent a government shutdown. Both sides agree that they are committed to avoid a stalemate like we're seeing with the latest COVID-19 relief bill. The Senate Democratic leader didn't mince words last week in his criticism of the Republicans' COVID-19 relief proposal.
It is laden with poison pills, provisions our colleagues know Democrats would never support to guarantee the bill's failure.
But when it comes to funding the government, both parties say a bipartisan bill can be passed. You think that we can get it done?
We'll get it. Our plan is to get it done this week and brought to the floor next week.
White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany said last week the White House is in favor of a funding agreement to avoid a shutdown, with Congress already tackling these two issues. GOP Senators Roger Wicker, Lindsey Graham, and Marsha Blackburn are taking aim at big tech in Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act.
Section 230 is what big tech has used to hide behind. Many in the pro-life community have found that things have been blocked or taken down, or they couldn't boost a post because it was deemed to be objectionable language.
The Online Freedom and Viewpoint Diversity Act would refine Section 230's censorship powers to let sites like Google, Facebook, and Twitter prevent specific postings on topics like promoting terrorism and self-harm.
You're going to have to define objective and say, does it fit one of these categories? And that is a way that we're going to get to the transparency and stop some of this.
Critics of the GOP bill say it needs Democratic support in order to pass. With only 50 days till the election, lawmakers know that they have to work fast to accomplish what they need to do. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
A group of lawmakers in Western Australia is recommending to preserve the seal of confession. A measure on fighting child sexual abuse calls for priests to break the confessional seal to report known or suspected misconduct. A number of clergy members said that they would not violate the seal. They added the law is hard to enforce because confession is done anonymously. A former colonel in the Salvadorian military has been sentenced to more than 130 years in prison for his role in the murder of 5 Jesuit priests in 1989. In Chento, Orlando, Montana, Morales was sentenced in a court in Spain. He was El Salvador's vice minister for public security during the country's civil war in the 1980s. He was convicted of planning and ordering the killing of the Jesuits, all of whom were from Spain. Japan's ruling party selects a new leader who is all but assured of replacing outgoing Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Abe had announced that he is resigning for health reasons. The ruling Liberal Democratic Party elected Yoshihide Suga to replace him. He is virtually guaranteed to become the next Prime Minister of Japan. The United Nations Refugee Agency has set up hundreds of tents on the Greek island of Lesbos. Some 2,000 asylum seekers were left homeless by fires set on that island. They destroyed Moria migrant camp last week. It was originally built to house 2,700 refugees, but overcrowding led to more than 12,000 living in squalor. In Belarus, police arrested protesters at the main Catholic church in the capital. At least 10 people were brutally detained at the Church of Saints Simon and Helena on Friday. They gathered to wish happy birthday to Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, who they say won last month's presidential election. Nearly 200,000 protested yesterday. The Vatican Secretary for Relations has returned to Rome following a visit to Belarus. Archbishop Paul Gallagher was taking part in diplomatic talks to try and find a solution to the unrest. The trip also comes after the Archbishop of Minsk was denied entry to his homeland 2 weeks ago. Andrea Galliaducci, Vatican analyst for EWTN News, has been following this story for us. Good to see you, Andrea. So what did Archbishop Gallagher and the Belarus government officials discuss?
So Archbishop Gallagher had 4 days in Belarus. According to my information, is on his way back to Rome right now or today. By the way, in the evening, he will be back in the Vatican. He had a meeting with Vladimir Makei, that is Belarusian foreign minister. Then he had meetings with the 2 auxiliary bishops of Minsk. We know that the Archbishop of Minsk is denied access to the country since August 31st. And then he also go in the streets and saw the protests, according to my information. So he also saw the situation in Belarus. It's a difficult situation because in Belarus at the moment there is not even a nuncio, that is a papal ambassador, and Gallagher had these talks and tried to smooth the situation.
The Archbishop of Minsk remains outside the country, we know this, and has not been allowed to return home. Can you update us on the situation?
Yeah, there is an information today from the Ministry from the Internal Affairs of Belarus that says that Archbishop Kondrusiewicz was denied access to Belarus because his passport was cancelled. We don't know the reasons why the passport was cancelled. Archbishop Kondrusiewicz already said that he's going to appeal, but still at the moment is not considered as a Belarusian citizen. There are no legal groundings for that, according to what I know. There are probably some provisions in the law, but we don't know the reason why Archbishop Kondrusiewicz was denied access, in fact. We're waiting for the updates. We're waiting for what the Ministry for the Internal Affairs will respond to Kondrusiewicz's request.
Andrea, can you talk about the relations between the Vatican and Belarus? What are they like?
Well, the relations are considered cordial. Actually, after the meeting between Archbishop Gallagher and Vladimir Mackay, the foreign ministry, they said that they want to keep cordial relations. Belarus is a sort of outpost toward Russia. So everybody's expecting at one point the Pope to go to Belarus because it's a sort of gate to Russia. And actually today I had the occasion to speak with Cardinal Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State, and he also said that likely the Pope will go to Belarus, but not now, obviously, when situation is better. We're waiting for the new nuncio, as I mentioned before. Cardinal Parolin is going to ordain bishop, the new nuncio, tomorrow. The new bishop is Monsignor Ante Josic, and I expect him to be in the country by the end of the week or at the beginning of the next week, in order to see how they can handle the situation, because obviously the Holy See now considers the situation with Belarus a sort of crisis, because the Archbishop is not allowed to get back to his seat.
Andrea, obviously the world is watching what's happening over there. Any idea if the situation in Belarus will improve?
Well, we don't know if the situation in Belarus will improve, because certainly the protests are not going to stop. Last Friday, there was a huge way of the cross through the streets of Minsk, asking for justice. The Pope made a mention without mentioning Belarus at the Angelus, saying that the protests everywhere in every country must be peaceful. And this is what the local church is trying to foster. But we don't know how much the President Lukashenko will keep handling the power this way, trying to also silence the opposition.
Well, Andrea, thank you so much for your time today and your analysis. We appreciate it. Andrea Galeoducci, Vatican analyst for EWTN News. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Well, head of the Vatican's Office for Worship and Sacraments is urging church leaders to reopen masses as soon as possible. Cardinal Robert Sarah says Christian life cannot be sustained without Mass and the Eucharist. He believes the coronavirus crisis has renewed our desire to be with the Lord and receive him in Holy Communion. Cardinal Sarah made the remarks in a letter to church leaders approved earlier this month. Coming up, Pope Francis has a reminder on the power of forgiving others. A man who went on a vandalism spree at a Louisiana church has confessed. Damage to the Immaculate Heart of Mary Catholic Church in Tioga included broken windows, doors, and statues. The sheriff's department arrested 23-year-old Chandler Johnson. The pastor says security cameras recorded the incident, and he does not know why the church was targeted. The new Bishop of Cleveland, Ohio, is welcomed at his installation mass by the Pope's representative to the U.S.
We appoint you Bishop of Cleveland.
Archbishop Christophe Pierre was among the dozens of bishops, priests, and deacons who attended today's installation. Bishop Edward Malesic is taking over the Cleveland Diocese and its 700,000 Catholics. He is replacing Bishop Nelson Perez, who became Archbishop of Philadelphia. Pro-life leaders tell Catholic news agency that policy decisions and presidential appointments made within the first 100 days of a Biden administration could roll back conscious protections and protections for the unborn. Joining me now is Kate Scallon, political affairs correspondent for EWTN News. Kate, welcome. Great to have you on. You've been reporting on this, talking to pro-life leaders ahead of the election. I know there are several areas of concern, but first, I want to start with the Hyde Amendment. What do they think we could see there?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me, Tracy. The Hyde Amendment is longstanding federal policy that bars the use of taxpayer funds for elective abortion procedures. Joe Biden, as a candidate for president, has reversed his previous support for the Hyde Amendment and now supports overturning it. So we could set the stage for taxpayer funding for abortion, as well as the conscience issues that would present.
Kate, what about the Mexico City policy, which prohibits the use of taxpayer funds for non-governmental organizations abroad that perform abortions? We know the Trump administration expanded the policy to include other forms of foreign aid, such as global health assistance. What are the implications there?
So the pro-life leaders I spoke with told me that the Mexico City policy is often the first benchmark we have, the first official action that an administration will take on abortion. It was first implemented by President Reagan, and it's been upheld by every Republican administration since, and it's been overturned by every Democratic administration, including the Obama administration, in which Joe Biden was obviously the vice president. So we could anticipate that very soon in his first days in office.
And the Trump administration has also enforced laws protecting conscious rights. How might a Biden administration change that?
So there are laws on the books to protect the conscience rights of, for example, a nurse who wouldn't want to participate in an abortion procedure. But a lot of these laws hinge on personnel who are willing to enforce them. And so some of these enforcement mechanisms might not be there if the Biden administration were appointing personnel.
Kate, what are some of the other areas of concern, and how soon do the pro-life leaders that you've spoken to think that some of the changes could be enacted? That's if Joe Biden were elected president.
So some of the other points of concern are a loosening of restrictions on chemical abortions, particularly during the coronavirus pandemic, as well as blocking states from defunding Planned Parenthood from their Medicaid programs. Now, some of these changes that are completely within control of the White House could happen as a ceremonial measure on President Biden's first day in office, but they might happen a few days later on the anniversary of Roe versus Wade.
Kate, anything else that you think might be important for our viewers to know?
Absolutely. So some of these pro-life leaders that I spoke with were very concerned about the Senate filibuster, particularly in a Biden administration in which Democrats took back control of the Senate. You might see movement to overturn the Senate filibuster, which would make passing some of these pro-life protections more difficult.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. And you can read more of Kate's reporting at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Kate Scanlon, political affairs correspondent for EWTN News. Thank you again, Kate.
Thank you so much.
Up next, why a new movie from Netflix is raising concerns. California's governor has signed legislation to change the state's sex offender law for engaging with minors. Judges now have expanded power on whether someone should be listed as a sex offender. Supporters say the measure ends discrimination against same-sex attracted young people. A new film on Netflix is drawing intense backlash for its sexualized depictions of young girls, leading several GOP lawmakers to call on the Justice Department to investigate. Cuties, which follows the story of an 11-year-old girl from Senegal torn between peer pressure and following her family's traditional Muslim values, has drawn criticism and concern over its use of overtly sexual dance routines and language. Joining me now on Skype to talk more about the movie is Melissa Henson, program director at the Parents Television Council, and Haley McNamara, vice president and director of the International Center on Sexual Exploitation. Thank you both for being here. We really appreciate it. Melissa, both Netflix and the film's female director defend Cuties, saying it's a social commentary against the sexualization of young children. What's your view on that?
Yeah, clearly there is an element of that in this film. But unfortunately, in critiquing the sexualization of female children, this film does exactly that. I think it would have been possible to powerfully communicate that message without also, in the process, doing what it amounts to exploiting these young actresses.
Haley, what about you? Your impressions of the film and the manner in which it makes its points?
Absolutely. I agree with Melissa. You know, really, there might be an intent in the film to critique this, but it does still at the same time hypersexualize the young actresses, which in fact actually normalizes the sexualization of children, which is highly problematic at a time when child sexual abuse is such a pandemic in our country and around the world. And it also is it's sending a message of self-objectification, which we know by research contributes to eating disorders, depression, vulnerability to exploitation, and more. So while the intent was maybe to be critical, just in actuality, they still sexually hypersexualized these young women.
Yeah, Melissa, this next question is for you. What's your concern for these young actresses in the film? And in your opinion, have they themselves been exploited by the film and its marketing?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I would say that the marketing is probably the least problematic aspect. I mean, I know there was a huge controversy when the movie art for this movie was first released about a month ago, and Netflix changed the movie art, and they said, "We're sorry, this didn't represent the intent of the filmmakers," but it did actually. The original poster, as problematic as it was a much more honest representation of what this movie is about and what a viewer is going to see than the art that they changed it to. This is a highly sexualized film that really puts these young girls' bodies on display, and that is terribly troubling. The first half of the movie was probably PG-13 and was probably a pretty reasonable critique of a sexualized media culture. But the second half of the movie gets very dark very quickly. It gets very explicit very quickly. So this 11-year-old girl, Amy, is shown pulling down her pants and underpants in order to take a picture of her privates to post online. They show these girls doing highly sexualized dance moves. In one scene, 11-year-old girl's breast is exposed, and you cannot tell me that there are not predators out there who haven't already taken screen grabs of this child and are circulating it on the dark web. These children have been left vulnerable, and they've been exploited in the pursuit of this film.
Yeah, it is very disturbing. Haley, this next question is for you. Cuties debuted at the Sundance Film Festival earlier this year under the title Mignons, but now has a much broader reach on Netflix. Let's talk about that for a moment, about the global problem of child sexual exploitation.
Yes, I mean, I think that Netflix has really become socially irresponsible by giving this film such a large platform. And it is true that child sexual abuse is an international crisis and problem. And even during this COVID era, as children are spending more time at home and alone, they've actually in many ways become more vulnerable to grooming because of being online and living in this hypersexualized world. And so we also have concerns that this film, Cuties, can be used actually by predators to help groom young girls, telling them that this is how young girls act, this is how they dance, maybe at encouraging young girls to imitate the film in the process of grooming them for abuse online as well. So it certainly is a concern that it has such a wide audience at this stage.
Haley, quickly, what actions would you like to see Netflix take?
We would like Netflix to, at a minimum, remove the gratuitously sexualized scenes from this film, or if they are not able to do that, to remove the film.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Thanks, the both of you. Melissa Henson, Program Director at the Parents Television Council, and Haley McNamara, Vice President and Director of the International Center on Sexual Exploitation. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And finally tonight, Pope Francis highlights the importance of forgiveness.
Pensiamo alla fine.
At a Sunday address to pilgrims at the Vatican, the Holy Father says forgiving others helps us avoid suffering and conflict. It is a way to imitate God and the grace he shows us. Pope Francis also says those who are unwilling or unable to show mercy will not receive it either. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We leave you tonight with more from the installation mass for Bishop Edward Malesic as the head of the Diocese of Cleveland. Good night and God bless.